Welcome to Detour, a show where we have conversations with interesting people who do interesting things. I'm your host, Shilpa Riker. Today I'm speaking with two writers who also happen to be editors of Ricepaper Magazine's new anthology called Belief. I'm happy to welcome Allan Cho and JF Garrard. Hey Allan, how are you?
Hi Shilpa, I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. Hello.
Hello.
Hi Jeannie.
Hi, how's it going?
Excellent, great to have you guys for joining in. I'm glad the Zoom will all worked well. This is the first time I've had 3 people on a Zoom video call recorded. I mean.
Okay.
But welcome. You're from Vancouver, right, Allan? You're tuning in from Vancouver, or are you?
Yes, I'm tuning in from rainy Vancouver.
Yeah, and you're in Toronto.
Yes, Jeannie's in Toronto.
Okay. So welcome. It's really great to have you here, as I mentioned. And I do have your anthology in front of me, and it is gorgeous. Like, it's so striking. And to give people, I mean, would you like to sort of give an overview of what this is about? Whoever wants to go first.
So Allan, why don't you talk?
Yeah.
You're the one that started this project.
Yeah, I'm the one who caused the trouble. Well, Belief is really a work that has been ongoing for 3 years. It's a collection of stories, poems, and creative nonfiction in Ricepaper Magazine and our online publication. So we've collected and curated those pieces that we think best illustrate really a belief in what we're doing, and that is giving voice to writers of Asian descent, not only in Canada but across the world. And title Belief is really timely in the pandemic that we're going through and all the suffering that we've had. And really, it's the light at the end of the tunnel, the belief that we have to hold on tight and be strong and have belief in ourselves that we're going to get through this together. So those stories encapsulate that sort of theme of belief. And I'll leave it there. Jeannie?
Well, I mean, echoing Allan's comments, yeah, we were aware of, like, we had so much material to go through over the past 3 years of submissions at Ricepaper. So we were looking for ones that had a very strong voice and sort of a positive outlook. I mean, there are some that, are not that positive, but we figured, let's try to stay positive. We had started it, I think, a little bit after COVID started. Like, we weren't sure how long this thing was going to happen, but it was just the timing. I mean, and then suddenly we all started working at home and stuff like that. So it was really important for us to find stories that, I don't know, brought some joy, I guess, to people, or so we thought. And they're from a variety of writers. Like, some of them were, well renowned, like Joy Kogawa. I mean, she has the Order of Canada. I think she's probably the peak, and Jim Wong Chu. And then you also have younger writers. Like, this is their first time being published ever, and they were so pleased to be part of this collection as well. So we have a variety of voices. Also, I find some of them more interesting are the ones between generations having conflicts. So there's some, like, you have the immigrant stories, but then you also have the children of the immigrants, and they're growing up with a different set of beliefs than their parents. And you sort of see in some of those stories how that comes into play when you have 2 generations like trying to coexist, and things that happen. So we're very proud of this collection. It's a very interesting array of stories across the spectrum from different Asian diaspora groups, and very diverse. I mean, it's not just East Asian, it's also some South Asian, and across different countries as well. And talking to some of the writers, some of them aren't in Canada anymore. They've moved, back home for COVID or whatnot. So everyone's all over the place right now.
Oh, okay. And this, I know you've already launched it, but I mean, you were planning on launching it for Asian Heritage Month. So can you tell us a little bit about what's happening there and the significance?
Well, I think there was Liter Asian has been planned for a whole year. And then suddenly when we were launching this book, we're like, what's a good timing? And so we still believe Asian Heritage Month is still good timing to launch the book, but we've teamed up with the Canadian Authors Association actually to do the book launch with Dark Helix, since Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, they're busy with Literation. I mean, it's all volunteers, so we only have so many people. But end of the month, we'll do a virtual Zoom book launch with the Canadian Authors Association. We'll have a raffle, give away a print copy to someone in Canada or US, because I'm not sure about the postal system, so we're sort of limiting it a little bit. And I guess, well, I'm planning on baking a cake for myself. I don't know about Alan, but you know,
I'm
like
gonna buy mine.
you'll buy yours.
Order it online.
But it's just, you know, it's very different to do a book launch
Yeah.
virtually because you can't be there in person. But at the same time, because as I mentioned, some of these writers have gone back to Asia, in a way it makes it easier for them to participate too, because they just call in and, you know, they'll do their book reading. So
Yeah.
we'll see how that goes, and it'll
Oh,
be
that's
a
cool.
bigger event. So
Yeah. That's really
yeah.
cool. I have I don't know if you have favorites from this book, but I had a couple of favorites that sort of like stood out for me. But I love the story of Davy and his brother, and just I think anyone even who's, you know, not necessarily Asian, but just that immigrant experience of having come to Canada, and their parents having all these big dreams for them, you know, to become doctors and lawyers so they didn't have to work in a supermarket. But you know, this kid is so into his creative thing. I think they said that he picked up his as soon as he picked up a crayon, he just, like, you know, went crazy and loved it, and then he started taking photographs. And after he graduated, like, I just loved the sentiment of that story. But it's also about, like, there's always that rift, right, between families, and you see that in a lot of also in immigrant families, of what parents have expected of you, and the you know, the wanting to sort of go and live your own sort of life and follow your own dreams. But I thought it was so beautifully written, and there was such a balance. And as you said, there's that positivity of how Davy comes, you know, in the end, like, you know, he may not have food to eat and be able, you know, go dumpsters and try and find some food to eat, but he never sort of like sleeps unhappy, I guess, because he always keeps his camera, you know, spotless, and still lives his dream.
Yeah.
And he never asked his parents for money too, like that. Like, it's so beautiful the way there's so much respect for still the family and the culture, and yet being able to sort of balance and follow your dreams. So I really love that one the most. Do you guys have, I have another one too, but let me know if you guys want to share any of your favorites.
I'm scared to say that.
That's true.
But well, I mean, I'll say they're all my favorites, but there was one that struck me close to home, was the Lucky Moose, the closest place to home, because I live a few blocks from Lucky Moose. So when I started reading that, I could totally picture her going in there, talking and to all sorts of different people. And actually, I think she's back in Vancouver now. She's not in Toronto anymore. But it was like this one place that people can, you know, if they feel like they miss home, they can go to the supermarket and buy foods that are familiar to them. Because when you go to a foreign country, you know, you want to find something familiar. And I'm just thinking about my childhood. Like, for some reason, my parents thought I would be an optometrist. So we went to all these different schools in the US to tour, and I never became an optometrist. But anyhow, when we were there, my dad always insisted on going to Chinatown. It was like he had to have rice. And I'm like, Dad, I saw a couple of rats ran by, and, like, you know, it's not the cleanest place. He's like, whatever, I want my rice. So we're like, okay. So it's just, you know, I think wherever people go, they try to find something familiar, and it's comforting to have that. Like, even when you're sick or during these times of COVID, like when you think about what you want to eat, you know, you just want something comforting for now. So that was a story that was a bit comforting to me. So
Yeah.
well, Alan?
Nice.
I quite, well, you know, they're all favorites, of course, but I think what's unique
that
about
was an
this.
unfair question, and I apologize for that. I just wanted you to share
okay.
like one or two.
This anthology is very unique in that there are writers that have passed away, but the writing has been published posthumously. So Ken Lem's is really interesting in that his son discovered poems that his father had written. And Ken had arrived in Canada during the 1920s as a paper son. when immigration was almost non-existent for Chinese and Japanese Canadians. So long story short is that these poems were translated by Lei Jian and published in Ricepaper, the magazine, online magazine. And we really wanted to have this as an opportunity to publish Asian Canadian literature that is not just by writers who are currently living, but also have passed away, but there's stories that really resonate with the experience, the Canadian experience. What is Asian Canadian? So that was a very unique poem that we wanted to have as part of this anthology. Is he an emerging writer? Of course, but at the same time, his story is emblematic of the Canadian experience, even though some people at that time did not consider them Canadian citizens and Canadian experience. So that piece really resonated with me, and I really wanted to talk about that.
Okay, that's beautiful. In terms of like the writers that you have made it into the book, I'm sure there's thousands and thousands of other writers as well. Like how do people who let's say of Asian Canadian heritage like want to write? There's always sort of a barrier to writing in this culture. Not in the thing culture, but I mean just in Canada itself for people who are of Asian Canadian descent. So how do you? Okay, I have a couple questions, I guess. One is, how do you encourage new emerging writers to submit or to follow their dream of writing? And then the second question would be also like, how can people submit to something like this or other sort of like writing, um, publishers or
It's tough, and that's why Ricepaper came along in 1995. Started off as a newsletter, but prior to Ricepaper, there wasn't really a publication that Asian Canadians or writers of Asian descent, because we also accept pieces from across the world, felt comfortable in submitting or would have a good chance of being accepted. So that's a challenge, because we tell writers to write about their stories, about themselves. And a lot of times mainstream publishers aren't interested about those stories. I'll give you an example. Gary Atkins has a theme of egg rolls. Mainstream publishers might not understand it or appreciate sort of that theme and that analogy, that metaphor of the Asian Canadian experience. So we offer that in terms of giving a platform, a stage to writers that will really want to build on the writing, but at the same time have a very comfortable experience and a sensitive sort of editing experience working with the Ricepaper and getting it published. So I think that's where we had begun, and this anthology is really about giving chance to writers, new emerging writers, a chance to have their voices heard.
And I think going forward, because the internet exists now, whereas previously, you would have less places to submit to, but it's still tough. It's like winning the lottery to get published. And there are Asian English language publications out there, but they're very few. And I have to say, Ricepaper is probably one of the longer running ones. And now with the whole diversity movement, like I hope that people will get more chances. But again, it's like winning the lottery, because there's very low barriers to entry to writing because everyone can write. And then you get all this competition. So, and especially in like small groups, like in minority groups, then you have to select one. Then everyone's just, trying to get that chance. But, they're very, like, we're trying to be a supportive platform as well. Like we started like a Write Rice thing once a month so people can gather and discuss their experiences. We have our literation. So we try to support new writers as much as we can, recognizing, we're a volunteer organization. And we hope that it'll give people encouragement and the courage to keep writing. But it's a tough game, as Allan says, like, but you just have to keep going. I mean, and it helps, I think, now that you see sort of more published writers that are diverse. So in a way, there are new role models out there. Like when I was like, I'm a writer too, but I remember growing up, I barely saw any Asian writers, or they were very niche topics. So usually immigration stories. And I think going forward, we're probably moving beyond that. Like there's speculative fiction stories and stuff where, it's like you see yourself in the stories. And the whole thing with the Marvel movie coming out with
All right.
Shang-Chi, right? Yeah, so like, so slowly but surely,
Yeah.
but in a way, nothing will replace like the hard work you'll need to do to publish. So
Yeah, and also
that's all I have to say.
a good nod to Chloe Zhao, like last night, who won the
Hmm.
best director
Mhm.
for the
Yeah.
Nomadland, and like that was just really lovely and timely and hopefully an inspiration to a lot of people to follow that kind of path, that creative path, whatever it is, um, and get there.
I also hope the anthology establishes a new generation of writers that go on to write novels and things like that. Many years ago, Jim Wong Chu and Bennett Lee edited the very first Asian Canadian anthology, Many Mild Birds. It's kind of forgotten in time now. It was published in the 1980s, and many of the short stories have gone on to become novels that are read in universities. I'll give you an example: Wason Choi's Jade Peony. It was rediscovered because he had published that in a magazine many years ago in the 1960s, I believe, and it was rediscovered in this anthology. So a lot of times, publishers look to anthologies for inspiration, seeds where they can find the idea of a larger length novel for a manuscript for the novel. So that's what we're hoping as well, is that it can whet some appetites of publishers that can dig and find the next Giller Prize winner.
That would be really fantastic. Do you know of anyone in your last couple of anthologies that this has happened to, or?
Yes, Madeline Tien. She was
Ah,
published in one of the anthologies that was published by Jim. In fact, she was also a winner of the Emerging Writers Award, the Asian Canadian Writers Emerging Writers Award. And she was an editor at Ricepaper Magazine as well
wow.
in 2001. And when she was a student at UBC. Long story short is that her novel was picked up by Douglas and McIntyre, and the next thing you know, 15 years later, Giller Prize winner. So the Canadian literary scene is becoming more diverse. It's an opportunity for us to continue pushing it forward and having a really progressive scene in the Canadian literary world. And we're kind of heading in that direction, but we just want to have more writers.
Yeah, I know both of you are writers, and I was wondering, like, when you were growing up, like, what were the kind of challenges or, positive things that sort of came into your life that sort of helped you, give you a nudge in this direction?
Oh gosh, I remember I was really excited about Evelyn Lau's book, The Diary of a Street Kid, I think it was called. And it was one of the first times I've seen a book like written in a contemporary fashion by a person of Asian descent. But unfortunately, my mother saw that, and then she was like, "What, you want to become a prostitute now?" And I was like, "Mom, just because you want to be a writer doesn't mean you have to live through everything." So, but my family has been very discouraging towards the arts, actually. So I actually didn't start picking up writing again until after I graduated from university and I started working. And I lived away from them. Maybe that was a big thing. I lived away from my parents, and then I started writing again. Um, and I wrote a East meets West vampire novel, but I couldn't find a publisher because they were telling me that the vampire legends are all European. There's no
Oh,
Asian
wow.
vampires, and I was like,
Yeah.
that's not true.
Yeah.
So I ended up actually doing a Kickstarter, and I was telling my parents about this, and they're like, now you're going around begging for money. And I was like, Mom, like I'm trying to publish this book. Let's
Yeah.
just think of it as marketing. And to my surprise, they actually gave me a few $100s, and I was like, oh,
Oh, very
okay.
nice.
So yeah, so in the end, I did that, and then I opened Dark Helix Press to hopefully encourage other writers. But it's tough, I think, because there's no one in my family that's a writer, and it's hard to see anyone, like I see creative enterprises in certain people, but at the same time, I think growing up, because we weren't well off, we were um, kind of living in poverty a little bit, so it was seen as a luxury, really. Writing is a luxury because you're not
Yeah.
working, you're not earning money.
Yeah.
um, so it's taken me a long time to sort of become a writer, but I think as we go along, like I'll keep doing it, but it is a difficult thing to do, and sometimes you wonder, why are you doing this at all? But
Mm.
you just keep going. Yeah, so yeah. So Alan, do you want to talk about your
Yeah.
journey?
I have a similar background to Jeannie's. I grew up really, yeah, blue collar family. So, parents that didn't even finish high school, and came to Canada with that, immigrant experience as well. Even though I have, ancestors in Canada that came, in the 1900s as well. But sort of that in the middle generation, my grandfather never came over due to the immigration restrictions. So growing up, it was really reading was a luxury, and school was meant to receive good grades and get good grades. So it wasn't until creative writing class in grade 12 in the 1990s that I started to really have an interest in writing, but there were no role models. Like Ricepaper was in its early heydays, and I didn't have that outreach yet to Ricepaper. So I loved reading Michael Ondaatje, English Patient, when I was in my final year of high school. Was one of my favorite novels, and Michael Ondaatje was a writer that I really had looked up to and try to model myself after. And it wasn't until many years later that he's actually Asian Canadian. His experience was, a lot of his novels are about that diasporic experience, but the publishing world did not sort of see him or appreciate him as very much an Asian Canadian writer, which he is, and his experiences. So is that maturation in terms of my writing, finding my voice and also identity as well. And really as a process of evolution. But growing up, I think the first book I've come across, written by a self-identified Chinese Canadian writer, was Sky Lee's Disappearing Moon Cafe, which again I came across in high school. I looked at the cover, I thought, this is really interesting. This must be a history book. I didn't, plug in at the time that this is the Asian Canadian experience. This is one of the first books that was written by Chinese Canadian in English. About the experience of growing up in Vancouver and Chinatown. And later on, it did win many awards, including the Vancouver City Book Award, and it was recognized as one of the classics of not only Asian Canadian literature, but Canadian literature. So, PhDs, dissertations have been written about, a number of them have been written about Disappearing Moon Cafe and Sky Lee, the author. That's how important this literature has been, the early Asian Canadian experience and Disappearing Moon Cafe. So I see that as one of the model writers that I've always tried to look up to, not particularly as a writing style, but in terms of the themes and the courage and the bravery to write about a lot of the secrets of Chinatown, and a lot of the stories that captivate, but a lot of families don't want to talk about as well. So
Yeah.
That's my experience growing up.
I think that's very common in a lot of just Asian culture and stuff. Like the family stuff stays within the family, and it's a lot about saving face and that kind of stuff. So I can sort of relate to that as well. But if you could go back and sort of to your 10-year-old self, what advice would each of you give your 10-year-old self? Maybe Alan go first since you're on a roll.
Sure.
I'm putting
I would say
coach.
enjoy the writing. I would say enjoy the writing process and go where your heart goes and write about your experience, because that's your voice and that will shine through in your writing. Because I think my 10-year-old self, there weren't really a lot of role models. So I looked to Stephen King, who was one of my favorite writers, and I'm still a big Stephen King fan. And I thought, oh, okay, I'm gonna pick up the pen. I'm gonna be really famous. I'm gonna put all my energy into becoming a famous writer, and I'm gonna make a lot of money. I think writing sometimes can easily be caught up in the celebrity culture as well, and it's really easy to get carried away and focus entirely on wealth and fame. I think a lot of young writers have this in their back of their minds as well when they're writing. But I would say, enjoy it, write what you know. And if you don't know about it, do a little bit of research. But ultimately it has to be about you, even though it's fiction, for example, or poetry. It has to come from your heart. So that's what I would tell a younger me in terms of when I begin writing.
That's lovely advice. What about you?
I guess similarly, like maybe have more focus. I feel like I'm very scatterbrained sometimes to sort of like sit down and actually like write more. Like it's a practice. Like you have to keep practicing, right, in order to get good at it. And I don't think I spend enough time practicing. And I would push myself to ask for those martial arts classes because back in the day, I remember my mom saying it's not for girls, but I was bullied quite a bit throughout elementary school. So I spent a lot of time just trying to survive.
Yeah.
So it would be nice to sort of be able to do that. But yeah, and to read more. I mean, I read mostly horror books, I think, for some reason. I read a lot of Stephen King and Clive Barker and Neil Gaiman. So that was my thing. But also just to enjoy everything. I think I was taking everything too seriously in a way. So just enjoy life and keep writing and be happy, I guess. So
yeah, that's lovely. Those are really good pieces of advice. On the last note, do you guys want to give any other sort of shout out to Belief? I mean, everyone should pick up this book. I actually have to ask you about the cover because I just think the cover is so striking. How did it come up across? Like how did you choose the cover, or was it something that one of you had in mind? Or
we have a team of illustrators on Ricepaper. Whenever we have a written piece, we would also have accompaniment from one of our illustrators, who are all artists, and they're either doing graphic design or communications and marketing. So this was designed by Katia Rojas, who works at University of British Columbia in communications and graphic design. So we had a number of illustrations that have been published in Ricepaper, and this was one that I think really espouses the idea of what belief is. I mean, look at it, and it is a striking image of really a strength from within.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which piece it was accompanied. I think it was with My Exorcist as a White Woman, right? I think it was the illustration for that piece. Like we had a couple of pieces that we shortlisted with illustrations to choose from, and that was one of them. So yeah, so in the end we chose this illustration. Ah, I'm getting a warning.
Yeah, I got a warning too.
Okay.
I apologize. I think I've never had that before, but I guess I know why it is.
Sometimes people come to our publication and they say that I come to look at the beautiful artwork that you have more so than some of the writing, and that really brings a lot of joy to my heart, because as an arts and literary publication, that's exactly what we try to do, is that we want to give spotlight to not only writers but also Asian Canadian artists as well. So that's where I think we've been very successful. And now with social media, we've also been able to share a lot of that with our audiences in different platforms as well. So that's also a story behind a belief.
Yeah, and for more information on Belief or Ricepaper Magazine, please, someone go ahead. Where can people go to learn more?
You can go to ricepapermagazine.ca. And also it can be purchased on Amazon, but also Dark Heel Express. Maybe Jeannie, you can talk to.
That's true.
About that.
Well, I mean, yeah, you can also look at it on darkheelexpress.com /ACWW/belief. There's actually a web page with pictures of all the authors, which isn't in the book, because in the book we don't have pictures of the people, but on the website we do. So you can sort of see what they look like. And we hope everyone enjoys the book. And I think it's come up to a time where there's more media coverage about Asian stories. So hopefully people even like non-Asians can read it and sort of empathize with
For sure, yeah.
and make a connection with everyone. I think going forward, with this whole diversity stuff, we want people to understand each other as well. It's not just one group getting ahead. So
No, and I think it's now even more important for not just, I mean, Asian Americans to understand. And
yeah,
I think it's for other people also to
yeah.
understand where people come from and how they think. But yeah, thank you guys. This is really fantastic. I know it'll do well because it is a fantastic, fantastic book. And happy Asian Heritage Month. But
Hi,
thank you
happy
again.
Heritage Month. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so
All right.
much.
And stay safe.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Take care.
Thank you again.
Bye for now.